Welcome to the business podcast of the American Chamber of Commerce in Australia. AmCham business podcasts are hosted by Dr. Duff Watkins. Duff is a director of Exec Search International, an author, and is also on the AmCham Council of Governors. AmCham, bringing business to you.
Hello and welcome to the business podcast of the American Chamber of Commerce in Australia, AmCham, bringing business to you. Today we're discussing financial rewards, friend or foe. That is to say, is showing me the money always a good idea? Hello, my name is Duff Watkins. I'm your host on the AmCham Business Podcast, and today our guest is Jairus Ashworth, who is a partner for the reward division of Aon. Jairus has spent his working life working with clients and businesses to harness the power of rewards and link them to the business outcomes. Jairus, welcome to the show.
Morning, Duff. Thanks for having me on.
First of all, explain to me, what is the reward division of Aon? Aon is such a big company. What do you guys do?
Okay, to put it simply, Aon is in the business of people and risk. So we, in our work, we help organisations make money and save money through proactive risk management and risk solutions, and in how they manage their human capital assets. Obviously, one of the divisions within there is the reward division, and in our practice we do two main we help companies in two ways. One is we run an extensive information practice, whereby we run salary surveys on the compensation practices of different industries and so on. And so these are very extensive studies that employers participate in. And in these, we basically measure the salaries paid and how those salaries are made up for all kind of different professions and careers. Mm-hmm. The companies want to know, is the grass greener on the other side? Everybody wants to benchmark and have things. So there's an ongoing need for that in companies around Australia, around the world. And the second side of that is providing consulting to organisations. So we can have a look at what you paid versus the market, but then the questions arise, well, what should I pay and how should I structure it? And so we assist companies make those important decisions.
So a company wants to know, where does our pay scheme fit into the market?
Precisely, and that's usually the first question people ask, where do we sit against the market?
Yeah.
And then it leads to, okay, well, now we know. What do we do?
Well, one thing I've discovered in my business career, Jairus, is that people are very, very precious about money. They seem to take it quite personally for some reason.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case, and I'd say it's not just in business, but in life generally. I mean, money's a part of our world. It's a part of. It's an important part of life. It pays for the rent, but it also reflects on people's self-perception. So it's a very important area.
Well, okay, let me ask you, how good or how bad is money as a motivator? Because I was telling you earlier, for years I used to lecture that money is not a very good motivator. It's very low rated. That's like 4 out of 4. But as it turns out, how wrong I was, and how wrong were the academics that I was quoting at the time.
Yeah, look, hopefully we'll get a chance to have a bit of a riff on the academic view of this topic a little bit later. But I think in general, we've got to consider money or financial rewards as one tile in the mosaic of human motivation, or particularly in a business sense. It's not fair to say, in fact I think it's demonstrably wrong to say that it's a poor motivator and has no impact. It's also, I don't think it's fair to go as far to say that money is the prime motivator for everybody. The truth, as with most issues, lies somewhere in the middle, and it is a topic though that tends towards extremes. It either works or it doesn't work, as opposed to, well, it works in these situations and these circumstances. So I think it's you've got to think about it as one tile in the mosaic of motivation, and in some situations it can be a very big tile, and in others it can be a very small one.
That's my standard joke. A person does not live by bread alone, but if you cut me off a slice less than I deserve, I'm damn sure going to let you know about it.
That's absolutely right, and that sort of I think hits on one aspect of reward, which is that it's financial reward. It's just as important that your relative reward versus your absolute reward. So how much you paid versus your peers. That leads to probably a pretty good example or a case I can talk about. It's not even a case; it's a theoretical one. But we hire a lot of young graduates into our organisation, and it's very interesting their approach to their financial reward, their sort of views on what they should get paid, and the rate at which it should increase, and so on. And it's very much a function of their socio-economic sort of upbringing, as opposed to the work they're doing and the value it produces for the organisation. So if we think about,
you mean they're picking up cues and clues from society or their peers about what they think they deserve, and
correct.
And you're suggesting there is a mismatch between their actual value.
There is their family, their peers, their school buddies. Someone from a high socio-economic area who's gone to private school. All their friends have gone on to become lawyers and doctors and so on. Comes in as an HR consultant, and has a very different, has a particular view of what their value is. The financial rewards they should receive, and it's very much an aspect of the surroundings that they're brought up in. We can then be interviewing a graduate for a position who's the first person in their family to ever sort of graduate through university, potentially the first person to have a full-time position. And their view, when you offer them a salary package of $50,000, it's like the heavens have fallen. They're amazed at that thing. So people's sort of perception of financial rewards is strongly influenced, particularly early in their career, on factors that are nothing to do with the company and the work. And that's obviously a bit of a wake-up call early on in people's professions and careers around what drives salaries, what drives financial rewards.
What is the, you talk to a lot of companies, a lot of businesses, what's the most common error you see out there?
Look, when it comes to pay, I specifically think about pay for performance as opposed to the broad topic of financial rewards. Probably the biggest concept in trying to differentiate salaries based on performance is that just like any business system or business improvement system, it's not something you can just copy from another organisation. It's not a simple process you can just pick up, put in, and away it goes. It's a significant management and organisational investment to have a pay-for-performance program that meets the goals you've set for it.
When you say pay for performance, are we talking about a bonus scheme or just regular salary?
Yeah, principally, because discretionary or incentive schemes are certainly an area where you ask the question, where do we see the most pain or the most sort of lack of return on investment? That's certainly one. People do have there are a variety of financial reward schemes in most organisations, not just the bonus scheme, but even fixed salaries are often contingent upon performance in terms of the absolute level and the rate at which they change. But if you're talking about the area where we get the most sort of mismatch between expectations and reality, it is in the incentive schemes. And as I said, people underestimate the conditions and investment required for one of those schemes to be effective and to achieve the goals you've set for it.
Is this the client, the company, or the individual?
From an organisational perspective, and the end result of that is dissatisfaction by the participant in the scheme. It's just like say implementing a quality management system. It's not a case of sticking a manual on the shelf or photocopying the one from your last company and sort of issuing a missive. Here's the new reward scheme. It is about fundamentally understanding the value drivers in your organisation, assessing how you can.
It's funny you say that. I see that all the time. I mean, these companies, they spend a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of intellectual power on constructing these these incentive bonus commission schemes. And first of all, you need an IQ of 212 to understand them. Secondly, they're so complex and so difficult that actually has the reverse effect. I get reports about people hearing the new commission scheme being announced and literally people hanging their heads in the meeting because they realize, no way on this earth am I going to get any of that. So why don't companies get it? The whole idea of an incentive is to, I believe it's to create an incentive for people.
To motivate. And look, that is one purpose of an incentive program. Motivating performance is one goal. There can be several others. It can be you can put in place variable pay or incentive schemes as a risk-sharing mechanism as much as motivation. So it's a sort of broader goal around having our costs reflect the performance of the business. It can also be for signalling as much as motivation, i.e. it's a mechanism through which to communicate priorities. But coming back to your point around often the complexity of these schemes, there's no doubt about it. I mean, if you're drinking the Kool-Aid that, hey, by putting it in the incentive plan we can, change behaviour, then you can sit, particularly from a management level, the list of things you then want to drive through it can be endless. And the fundamental thing is, if it's working, then let's add another thing and make that, drive that behaviour as well. But there's absolutely a point at which you've got to marry the bottom-up view and the top-down view. Bottom-up view being the motivational impact on participants, the top-down view being the degree to which it aligns with our strategic drivers. And we do see common errors are trying to cascade down goals through that the participant doesn't have an impact on. So just because the senior manager's interested in margin, if your sales rep's got no pricing, no ability to negotiate price, then they really can't be measured on margin. You've just got to measure them on revenue, what they can impact, and understand that there's going to be where margin's controlled is somewhere else. Some of these, and look, a very frequent sort of intervention we make is in reviewing why a commission plan in particular is not working. And a very common theme is that it's so complicated we can't even understand it. We don't have the time. If I can't sort of pick it up in a few minutes and get my head around it, then despite it being beautifully aligned and covering everything that you want to.
Okay, so we're talking about complexity of remuneration schemes, and you were saying?
So certainly marrying that top-down and bottom-up view is important. So a basic condition of something being used to motivate somebody is that they've got to understand it, and you do have to in designing the right incentive plan balance those two appropriately, and usually that means not trying to manage everything through the pay program. So the financial incentives absolutely have a time and a place and should be aligned to certain activities and behaviours. But there are points where you go, well, hang on, we can just manage that through how we manage people. We can achieve those outcomes, through a combination of these motivational techniques, not just everything in the financial reward system. One of my colleagues in the US refers to sales commission schemes as the organisational sort of shower trap, in that everything in the company gets thrown into every issue in the company. Someone goes, oh, let's put this in the commission scheme to try and catch that or to address that. And there's absolutely a point at which you've got to sort of stop and reassess as to how much you're putting in there. Should be able to be understood in a 5 or 10, the guts of it should be a 5 or 10 minute conversation to really get the incentive plan down. Any more than that, and there's a warning sign.
Now, you introduced a novel concept to me. You talked about an incentive scheme, bonus commission, as some sort of risk mitigation. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so this is, again, in addition to the motivational impact of pay for performance, a very valid reason for having a variable pay scheme or pay for performance is about risk sharing between the organisation and labour.
Wait a minute, are you suggesting it's not all about me as the employee?
Well, no, it's not.
Bummer.
What we want to do is see ourselves as the employee as part of our organisation and contributing to the success or otherwise. And capital, which has, by the way, over the past sort of decade in Australia, increased its share of GDP pretty much at the expense of labour. So the labour, the amount of GDP going to wages has declined by nearly 10% over the past 15 years, and that's been matched by an increase in capital. If you take risk, you get reward. That's the bottom line, and most people understand that concept. If you want to treat labour as a fixed cost, or labour wants to see itself as a fixed cost and get guaranteed remuneration, and that's clearly going to be set at the minimum tolerable level to achieve the profits that you want. Whereas if you take risks and accept that in good years of good performance, we can earn more than what we're targeted at, but similarly we'll share the downside in a tougher year, then generally that is advantageous to the company because profits become more predictable, because expenses move in line with revenue more closely, and as a result, it's effectively a risk-sharing mechanism, and that's why it's a quite powerful concept in that sense. And we want employees to think of themselves as entrepreneurs and businessmen more than as a box of paper, which is a fixed cost input that that doesn't have a variable output. Based on its productivity and its motivation and efficiency, and so
I actually wonder. That's a very good, very true, very excellent point. Is that a remuneration scheme? People tend to think of it as about themselves. I joke about it, but people tend to think, "What's in it for me?" This bonus incentive remuneration scheme, whatever you want to call it. I'm looking for the personal benefits for me. But from the company's viewpoint, from the business viewpoint, it's actually risk sharing. When we have good times, everybody profits more than if we have bad times, but during the bad times we minimize the risk for you as the employee by giving you a fixed salary, maybe a car, things like that.
Correct.
Is that how it works?
Correct, yeah. Risk, it's fundamental. If we share risks, then we share rewards. And nobody, people, there may be the extreme case, but these very rapidly growing technology companies in the States have got a fairly established model of paying lower cash salaries in their growth sort of phase and providing large batches of equity in the company. So under that model, it's working for the organisation, preserving cash, handing out something that only becomes valuable if the value of the company goes up. And for employees, they're sharing that risk by accepting a lower fixed return, but taking the upside if the company's successful. And these are organisations that have made many people very, very wealthy. So that model is, when it works beautifully.
Well, and that, of course, is a new model because the internet is a new thing. Now, let me ask you, earlier in the show, I talked about all the research that I quoted, which said that financial rewards were really not that powerful, not that strong. What about the current research? What's the current academia showing?
So it's a heavily researched topic. I mean, if you type in, pay for performance research, you go to any kind of academic journal sort of repository. There's extensive research. So we've got to the point where there's meta studies of meta studies. Yeah. And let me tell you, whatever you want it to say, it can say. There's
statistics. If you torture them enough, they'll confess.
There is a very positive, based on a quite popular TED talk by Dan Pink, and his associated writings and blog and so on. There's a very sort of strong momentum behind this concept that for any work that is not very routine in nature, financial rewards are a disincentive in that they drive the wrong behaviours and actually so lower business performance. And look, I've been called into boardrooms of very large companies to say, why should we still have incentive plans based on this? This concept. They don't work. So that's become a very powerful idea. But when you go to the academic research, there's significant research, both proving and disproving that case. There's a fairly big longitudinal study done out of the University of Chicago, which has covered over 70 studies and showed that the pay for performance companies produce 42 to 47% higher productivity, and I've seen studies that show the opposite. Problem is, a lot of
so what's the difference? Okay, we're getting. that's not unusual in psychology. It's not unusual in medicine. But what would you explain the difference to be?
Look, a lot of it's a very hard topic to conduct experiments on because people's motivations are
complex,
internal and complex, and they don't often observing their behaviours doesn't necessarily tell you about their motivation. It creates a link, but not that. And so as a result, in a lot of cases, they've got to resort to very basic laboratory studies of students brought in to do a task and try and infer from that. And I find that whilst that's interesting, and it it produces some things worth talking about, it doesn't necessarily reflect what we see in the field and the sort of issues we have to deal with. So the methodologies can be difficult, and I'm not having a go in any way. It's just a difficult thing to measure, and so with such a hard thing to put down, it's no surprise, therefore, that the academic research is very varied, and that there's not a provable point around this. So so we tend to supplement that with what we can in the real world.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, speaking of the real world, the one that you and I live in, can you give me some examples about what works, what doesn't work?
Yeah, well, maybe just I could start with some of the research that we at Aon conduct, and we have a program called the Aon Hewitt Best Employers that we run every year, and this is a study which organisations participate in, and we measure the level of employee engagement in their firm, and we correlate it to financial performance. Mm-hmm. And we've certainly found that the concept we have of engagement, which is that employees who are engaged say good things about the company they're working for. They state their intention to stay with the company, and they state their intention that I put in extra effort for this organisation, so they strive for achievement. So companies that have a high proportion of employees who sort of hit those three buttons.
So that's greater engagement, greater retention, and greater discretionary effort.
Correct, and greater customer service, greater financial performance, greater total shareholder return. There's a strong correlation between high engagement companies and the outcomes they get in both a financial and broader sense. In these studies, we then sort of dig down a fair bit, and one of the things we've noticed is certainly that best employers or high engagement companies differentiate reward much more than the rest, those who aren't best employers. High performers receive disproportionately higher fixed and variable pay remuneration outcomes. They pay for performance. Okay, they use reward as one of the signalling mechanisms or one of the motivational tools in their army at a much higher rate. 2 in 3 best employers have high differentiation in pay outcomes for their staff. Less than half of the rest do. So we certainly found a strong correlation in that companies that have got highly engaged workforces do differentiate performance. Now, that sort of leads to
with money, with some sort of incentive, yes.
Specifically in rewards. Now, they differentiate in other things too.
Yeah.
But definitely in rewards, they increase their salary faster, and they pay them bigger bonuses if they've got a bonus.
Can you give me an illustration of how that works based on your experience?
Yeah, many many companies with incentive schemes will have a structure such that for, say, achieving the goals that you've been set, you'll receive the full amount of your incentive. But if you exceed those goals, you can earn more. Yeah. So the outcomes often linked to the results of either specific KPIs or an overall blended sort of performance score through the performance management system. And the amount they pay to those people, instead of a very, very strong performer who achieved a lot of outcomes earns maybe 110% of the bonus, whereas an average person who achieved average outcomes gets 100, they'll pay that person, the top performer, 200% of their bonus rather than 100. So they differentiate more. They share that more with they invest more in the resources that I think are getting a better return for them. And similarly, they hold back payments from people who aren't achieving as well.
So so a bit more graphic, I guess. Okay, makes perfect sense. Jairus, I know you got a lot of war stories, and I know you work with a lot of clients. Give me the goss. Give me some dirt. Give me some. What sort of things can you share with us about real life remuneration, reward anecdotes from the front lines in which you've served so nobly for so long?
Yeah, mate, look, we've obviously we're bound by client confidentiality in a number of cases. But
you're with friends. Come on, it's not going to go any further.
In general terms, some of the interesting war stories. I mean, those who say that paying performance doesn't make a difference. With organisations during the last recession, when many organisations face significant challenges around talent retention and also just keeping the doors open. There are a number of approaches that organisations took to adjust to that or to deal with it. In many cases, to get the labour costs down, it was just straight up, significant redundancies and layoffs. A number of organisations implemented temporary pay reductions, across the board ones. And in one particular case, I can think of an organisation dropped salaries by 20%, effectively putting everyone 4 days a week. And the net outcome, in hindsight, looking at that at the end, was that what happened was that the strong performers, the key talent, left. That didn't work for them. The Joe averages, who are sort of hanging in there, were stuck it out. So when you implement sort of blanket, pay changes that don't give regard to performance and value, then often it can have the completely the wrong
undesired
outcome.
effect.
Correct, you've done that. That's true of a number of organisations that have removed variable pay schemes for whatever reason they weren't working. Okay, we'll just pay it out, get rid of it. The problem is that appeals to the to those who weren't doing well under the old scheme, and it's
Can you predict that? If you go into a company, can you predict that if they try that? Can you predict the results of that?
Well, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. The benefit of hindsight is a great teacher for all of us, and the experience of having seen these outcomes we use to help counsel organisations on the appropriate strategies. But you do have to. When you put in, when you make changes to rewards, you've got to look at it on a segmented approach, so very much through a talent lens. Who's this going to affect and how, rather than thinking about it in an overall sense.
Okay, let me ask you about a hot, juicy topic that is big internationally, and that's CEO pay scales. In the U.S., you've seen the stats. I can't recall them at the moment, but it's roughly similar in Australia as well. CEOs can be paid many times more than the average workers' remuneration, and many people think this has just gotten out of hand, that it's detached from reality. You're in the business. What do you reckon? What do you hear?
Okay, often the very significant escalation in the pay of CEOs, particularly in large public organisations, and we can talk about that because it's all disclosed information, has grown at a rate far in over the last sort of 20 years has grown at a rate far in excess of general sort of wage levels. It's a big topic, Duff, and we could spend the next hour on it, but the drivers of changes in CEO pay are very different to the drivers in pay of others. It's a different labour market, and the comparison point is different. I was talking to a guy called Grafe Crystal, who was a bit of a legendary pay consultant in the US who's turned autark in the sense that he's now sort of speaks out against the excesses of it and recants some of his past practices. But he was saying that one of the seminal moments in CEO pay was when a mega grant of stock options was given to the CEO of Disney. And this was, on a different scale. They decided, right, we're going to give this guy a really big single grant of shares. And it was the sort of rationale behind that. I wasn't told at the time, but fundamentally there was a lot of corporate raider activity happening at the time. Remember, not the current private equity one, but the one from the 80s, the great is good days. And they're saying that the CEOs, what you got to pay them is kind of taking in mind what the they're sitting next to the guy from private equity who's coming in and making $100 million on the transformation, and saying, well, hang on, I'm just as much a part of that as you are. I want to see a significant cut of that. And so the pay of these people who they considered peers, although one could argue that corporate financiers and so on are taking a different kind of risk and adding a different kind of value than a CEO running an organisation. But that became the kind of that came into the mix of what you should be paying a CEO. And as a result of that, it sort of just got pegged to a different yardstick. And the tools through which we pay CEOs obviously are still fairly meaningful fixed salaries, but the bulk of it's through performance-based incentives. Now, some might argue that back in the early days it was predominantly stock options, which are worth nothing unless the company increases value. Yeah. But particularly in America, they've now transitioned to more predominantly restricted shares, which are shares that you're granted and vest over time. And so even if the share price goes down, you can still...
It's a guaranteed return still.
Reserves. Yeah, so there's some big questions, and so as a result, in many cases, that's moving to having an extra hurdle in place that you have to meet some TSR hurdles in addition for those to vest, which is common practice in Australia, the UK, but less so in the US. But fundamentally, the reason CEO pay is the level it is from a completely different set of factors. CEO doesn't sit down and have a pay review like most people in the organisation, and it's the pay that they're hinged to is completely different.
It reminds me, it's like saying the CEOs are measured in meters, whereas everyone else is measured in yards. It's the same distance, but they're using a different scale for.
Yeah, look, that's a pretty interesting analogy. But the social justice argument around how can some person be worth that is a debate that's not solved through the sort of lens that we're looking through. Whether that's the case or not is a totally separate matter. But the reasons for why they are the level they are what they are, right or wrong. That's how they got there. What I am sure of is that any government attempts to intervene in that market are doomed to failure. So it's not going to happen through legislation and law and politicians saying CEOs get paid too much, let's put in a salary cap. Good example of that is in the United States. There's a $1 million deductibility cap on base salaries. So that's people just get paid $1 million base salary and significantly higher equity upside, or it goes into the pay for performance tools. They don't work. People work around them. That's not the thing that's driving where they are.
Well, we started asking the question with financial rewards, are they friend or foe? And I think the answer that I'm hearing from you is yes, they're both. It depends, or maybe. It's just too complex. It depends on the situation entirely.
Yeah, look, it's a bit of a non-answer, but that's absolutely true, Duff. It's just like it's like any organisational system. Incentives work if you set a goal for them. Or pay performance works if you set a goal for them. If you understand what you're trying to drive and assess that a financial reward is an appropriate way to drive that.
And you're trying to drive behaviours, is that right?
You're trying to look, fundamentally we care about outcomes, but in many cases the behaviours are important to those outcomes because otherwise they lead to shortcuts. Ruthlessly pursuing a goal at the expense of ethical standards or peer relationships, or customer relationships is clearly short-term good, long-term bad.
Yeah.
So, as I say, it's a mosaic. You want to measure and drive outcomes, but not at the expense of behaviour. So they need to be managed as well.
Okay, so the last question for you today, Jairus. I want to construct a mosaic. I want it to be beautiful. I want it to work. What works best? What sort of advice would you give somebody?
Okay. In terms of using pay for performance mechanisms, you got to first understand what you're trying to achieve. What do you want to do? Don't do it because other people do it or because you did it at your last company, you saw it somewhere. Understand fundamentally what are you trying to do? You're trying to share risk and reward. Are you trying to motivate behaviours? First of all, what's your goal? And don't say all of them because you can't design something that actually meets all those goals. The second thing you've got to look at is, having set those goals, what's the appropriate mechanism through which to do that, and how does it interrelate with other processes, systems, ideas, strategies? So what's the right tool for the job? And once again, it's not the one that your competitor's using necessarily. It's what's right for you, and how's it gonna, what's the impact gonna be in your.
That's where the
organisation.
mosaic, because it isn't in isolation. I'm picking that up loud and clear. It must interact with everything else in your business.
Yeah. And can you support it? Do you have the sort of business that can actually support it working properly?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you can't measure what you're trying to reward, then you're going to have trouble. It's going to be problematic. The grand debate over the use of pay for performance in the healthcare or physician sort of sector, as well as the education sector. Should we pay primary school teachers based on the marks their classes get? There's a huge debate in those areas around what is performance. Is it the marks, or is it the relative performance is absolute? If you don't have a pretty strong view on what you're actually trying to achieve and the way to measure that value, then it's going to be problematic if you're trying to use it to motivate. It could be okay if you're using it to reward in hindsight, or to share risk and reward. But so you've got to understand: can we robustly measure the performance, and do the main stakeholders in the process actually agree on it? Then you start getting your hands dirty. If you've sort of jumped over those hurdles, you get your hands dirty around what's the right way to do this. Do we want to, is our company a place where we want financial reward to be significant? This is a place where, we want talent to earn a lot but take risks to do it. Should our variable pay be signalling? It's only maybe 5, 10, 15% of salary, so it's sort of meaningful, but it's not everything. Those are the kind of sort of mechanical or design decisions that you've then got to work through. But you've got to always link it back to the goals that you're trying to achieve, not just what you've seen work elsewhere or not work elsewhere.
This is a complex issue. This is why I always call you, Jairus, when I get involved with this stuff. You've been listening to the Business Podcast of the American Chamber of Commerce. Our guest today has been Jairus Ashworth, partner at the Reward Division of Aon. My name is Duff Watkins, and on behalf of AmCham, thank you for listening. AmCham, bringing business to you.
You've been listening to the Business Podcast of the American Chamber of Commerce in Australia. This podcast is supported by Lenovo and VML. Lenovo is one of the world's leading personal technology companies, producing innovative PCs and mobile internet devices. Lenovo, for those who do. VML is a full-service digital marketing agency that can take you where you want to go. Everything we are is in everything we